All right, Q&A number 4 here. I got a lot of questions on Q&A number 3, so there are a couple that I won't be able to get to. I did briefly scroll through. There's a couple program reviews that I probably just won't be able to quite get to in this video, so I do apologize for that. But there are a lot of good questions that I saw, so I do want to get to those a little bit for you guys. This will be a long one, I assume, so if you're on your commute or if you're mowing the lawn, go for it. Just plug the headphones in, turn your phone off, and you should be fine. Just if you're not doing those, sit back, relax, enjoy the Q&A. Let's get into it. So, first question from E-Man Gaines was wondering how the overloaded stretch could be utilized on certain exercises. I utilized heavy overloads on shrugs, lifting as much as I could hold, and just stretching and tearing the muscle. This blew up my traps. Was wondering how this could be utilized for different body groups. Yes, this works. Weighted stretch clearly works. Have to give props to Alex from Alpha Destiny on kind of popularizing that. I've grown my traps a ton through weighted stretching. It's a great way to train, so I 100% agree. That's a great question. I don't have a simple answer for you on this. What I would say is learning anatomy and understanding your own personal mobility and finding lifts that allow you to safely take each muscle through a weighted stretch in a lengthened position is a very important factor to building muscle. Program this properly. Don't go overkill right when you start. Make sure it's safe. Make sure you're not going past your actual mobility and risking yourself of getting an injury, but just definitely experiment with it. It's a very important factor to building muscle, in my opinion. Next question from Quacky. Appreciate your answer, sir. Program review sounds like an interesting series in the future. We'll see. I might do it, might not. Question. Thought on deload for bodybuilders. This is quite a hot topic recently. Yeah, so I actually never watched anybody's video on deloads because I kind of already have my own opinion on deloads. So my opinion with deloads and fatigue management for hypertrophy training is that it's best to sacrifice a little bit of volume or intensity on your strength work if that's something that you're doing in order to stay in the gym more consistent and more frequently in the long term. So to explain that a little bit more clearly, if you're training so intensely and so hard on your compound lifts, if you're just doing like one of those barbell focused push-pull leg type splits where you have to deload every 3 weeks, in the long term, that's bad. Let's say you are training at such a high volume and or intensity with a lot of high frequency, heavy barbell compound lifts and you have to deload every 4 weeks. Within a year, that's 3 entire months of training that are just gone, that you can't get back. I think with bodybuilding being a game of patience, accumulation, and frequency, you should cut back slightly on the strength work, program it a little bit more mindfully, and make it so you don't have to deload. When it comes to rotating lifts and prioritizing certain muscle groups, now that is something that I do within my own training. I will sometimes put muscle groups on the back burner where I just cut their volume down quite a bit, put it on like a maintenance type volume, so I'm not completely detraining that muscle. I'm just doing a lot less direct work in order to apply that volume elsewhere. But in a general sense, I think if you can't keep up with your overall volume and your overall intensity within your own training, it's probably a little bit overkill. You're probably overtraining a little bit. So cut back a little bit, still train hard, but this is where isolation lifts and non-barbell compound lifts really come into play because you can train so extremely hard on these and so close to failure and never have to ever deload or worry about fatigue management. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do any fatiguing lifts that are also high in stimulus, but I'm saying this is the time to utilize isolation lifts. If you're dealing with fatigue, like leg extensions are a great way to get volume in for your quads, and you will have like basically no fatigue from that. You will never get fatigue, but you can get a ton of quality volume in. So I could go on for a while about that one, but I'm not going to today. Next question from Monkey Bars Every Day. Thoughts on pre-exhausting traps with shrugs before doing rack pulls or behind the back deadlifts or block pulls? So basically, pre-exhausting your traps, I'd assume with some more direct work like a shrug or a trap isolation movement before a heavier compound movement with your traps being involved. Will this increase or decrease the quality of tonnage through the trap? That's a good question. I think you're viewing it from an incorrect angle on this one. I do think it's a great question, but I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this one. So, if your traps are not a limiting factor on those heavy compound movements, but your intensity is higher. So say you're pulling heavier weight on a block pull, but your traps aren't the limiting factor. I think that is inferior to the block pull with already fatigued traps, even if the overall weight you're using is a little bit lower compared to your 1 rep max. So the simple answer for you here is I like the question you're asking. I don't think tonnage should be the focus on a lift like that. I think your traps being the limiting factor should be the primary thing you're focusing on here. As long as you're not getting outside of your volume and intensity window that you can actually train and make gains with, you should be fine. I wouldn't worry about the tonnage quality on that one. Next question is from Riley Jackson. I've been doing pyramid sets for a while and really love them. It allows me to use less weight on my top set. I also take a 5-second rest every 10 reps. This allows me to generate more metabolic stress. I'm getting way sore than ever. Okay, this is like a full-on program type. I'm not going to be able to answer that. I apologize. Let's see. Next question from Doc Yak. I had some questions about training to failure. I've recently seen a lot of videos from GVS, Bromley, Revival Fitness, RP, Faz Lifts, amongst others, debating how close to failure and how to tell. In writing my next block, these seem to be takeaway points. Free weight compound movements, squat, deadlift, bench press, OHP, and their close variations should not be taken to failure. They should go until the reps begin to slow down. Maybe once at the end of the block, we can take it to failure. Okay, so there's a few parts to this question. I'm just going to answer them one at a time. Free weight compound movements. There is a lot of nuance to that. I understand that as people, it would make things much easier if we could categorize everything and say, okay, well, free weight compound lifts, the best RIR protocol is to have 2 reps in the tank. You don't want to take it to failure. You just want to go until the rep slows down. One, I would say the rep speed slowing down is very subjective because every rep will slow down a little bit more. I would also say that free weight compound lifts can vary so much. So you take something like a conventional deadlift, you should not be taking that close to failure. But then again, a dumbbell row, so let's say a 1-arm row is also a free weight compound lift. You can take that to failure, and you can even take that past failure perfectly safe. So there's way too much nuance to this. I'd say, okay, so it looks like you talk about axial loading in your next portion of the question, so I'll save that for next. So part 2 of the question would be isolation movements, define a single joint exercise, likely okay to take all sets to failure. Yes, I don't want to say 100% because there might be some isolation lifts that you shouldn't quite take to failure, but in a very general sense, yes. You can take a lot of isolation lifts to failure, and for anyone that has a few years of lifting under their belt, yeah, take them past failure, even before that, as long as you're not like a total beginner. It's not going to hurt you, it's just not necessary. Yeah, train them hard, you can train them to failure. Some advanced methods past failure for sure. I'd say most 90+% of the time. Machine stabilized and secondary compound movements, RDL, hack squat, leg press, machine chest press, pull-ups, etc. This is where I'm unsure. My initial thoughts would be to take either the last set of these exercises to failure versus only non-axial loading, so upper body, leg press, etc. to failure on the last set, but axial loaded, hack squat, RDL, etc. should be similar to the compound movements. What are your thoughts? Yeah, you're pretty much spot on with this one. So you have to take it from a fatigue / injury / how worth it is it, stimulus to fatigue for each lift. So something like a leg press, the fatigue isn't going to be too high on that. You can take that pretty close to failure. Something like an RDL, you can get very similar hypertrophy from keeping 2 or 3 reps in the tank compared to taking it literally to failure. But that it's those last couple reps where the fatigue starts to creep in without any added benefit for hypertrophy. So RDL, I probably wouldn't take to failure. Hack squat, leg press, yeah, you can take them pretty close. Machine chest press, 100%, especially if you're not injury prone and you don't have any injury history. Pull-ups, no risk of injury on these. If you're doing them properly and training fine, no history of injuries or anything. The only problem with taking pull-ups to failure is I do find that leaving 1 rep in the tank is always superior just from an overall intensity perspective when it comes to your later sets in the workout. So you have to experiment, and again, you can't categorize this stuff. And I know how bad we all want to, because it would make lifting so much more simple. You just have to experiment with yourself and assess based on injury and stimulus to fatigue. Next question from Anthony T. Do you have any experience with exertion headaches? I got one the other day on chest press. Okay, so I do not have any experience with this. I do remember you particularly asking this question. I apologize, I don't have an answer. If I tried to answer it, I'd just be doing you a disservice. I'm just going to keep it real on this channel. There's definitely better people you could go to for that, for sure. Next question is going to be from Robert G. Just found you recently and love your content. Question: 10x3 versus 3x10 for hypertrophy. Chad Waterbury from T Nation said for a natural, it's best because strength goes up with fewer plateaus. So I'm assuming that he said 10x3 is better than 3x10. Yeah, I guess I don't know why else you'd be comparing the two. So 3x10 beats 10x3 any day of the week for hypertrophy. One, because you don't have to warm up as much for 10 sets. That's a tiny little point that doesn't matter a whole ton in the big picture, but you're doing 3 reps is just not enough for hypertrophy. Doing 10 sets of one lift is totally unnecessary. At the end of the day, you're getting very similar amounts of volume in. There's no reason. If you're doing sets of 3, you don't need to do 10 sets. And there's very few lifts that even applies to. Anyways, the only lift that I'd say you should even be doing triples on is deadlifts, and I don't even think those are entirely necessary. Conventional deadlifts. There's RDLs, which count as deadlifts, which you could do a little bit higher reps on. 3x10 is always going to be better. 10 times out of 10. So next question from Danny Yerp. Hey man, recent subscriber here. Do you think all back exercises should be done with straps or Versa grips? I usually only use them for the last sets when I feel my forearm will limit it, but I'm not sure if I could be getting more from them if I just use the grips always. So yeah, I'm a big fan of straps and Versa grips. I've actually never tried Versa grips, but straps 100%. I don't use them for everything because there's just a lot of lifts that I won't even need them for. But yeah, if you're doing a heavy lift like a shrug or a rack pull, power shrug, anything like that, even types of rows and pull downs and pull ups and whatnot, yeah, you can use straps. I mean, if you need to use them, if your forearms are the limiting factor on every single lift you're doing for your back, that's probably another problem you'd need to address. And I think you should be training your grip strength and building muscle within your forearms with some type of wrist flexion and extension. But yeah, straps are great. Definitely use them because you do want to make sure when you're doing heavier back work, your back is the limiting factor, not your forearms. Isolate your forearms. Next question from Krunk. Would you be willing to do a video on how you would structure full body training? Your philosophy differs from others, and I'm curious as to how you would implement that typical 2 to 3 day schedule. I know you mentioned it not being optimal for hypertrophy, and I agree, but I would also love to refer some busy friends towards that type of video. I don't think I'll make a video on it. I do have a couple clients right now that are on 3-day full body splits. Some people it works for, and I think if it works for you, that's always going to be best, because at the end of the day, if you're crushing a 3-day split versus skipping half the time on a 5 or 6 day split, the 3 days always going to be better 10 times out of 10. So I don't think they're optimal in a perfect ideal world, but you do have to find what's best for you. With that being said, I don't know if I'll ever make a video on that. I might, but we'll see. I think the key to those is to keep your workouts efficient as possible. If you're doing 3 times a week full body, you do want to make sure you have a relatively high work capacity. Utilizing supersets and giant sets is going to be key. You don't just have to do all compound lifts every time you're doing a full body workout anyways, but what you want to do is, do as many giant sets as you can. You're going to have to play around with your program a little bit, but that will help you out a ton when you're training like that. If you're just doing straight sets like squats, then deadlifts, then bench, and then your isolations one after another, you're just going to burn yourself out. You're going to be in the gym forever, wasting a ton of time. Do your supersets, do your giant sets, 100%. Next question from Z Design. Let's see. Actually, no, that's not a question. Next question from Dean Wright. Okay, that's another program review. I apologize, man. I'm not going to be able to get to that one. Next question from Theon E. My question: if we were to always train above 10 reps on all lifts, including compounds, then what about the growth of fast twitch type 2 muscle fibers? Will they be trained sufficiently when trained to failure? This is a kind of a tricky question. I would say, first off, I'd say don't train everything above 10 reps. Definitely have some lifts that are getting lower towards like 8 or 6 reps, 100%. You definitely want to have variety of rep ranges within your training. I don't think it would be optimal to train solely above 10 reps. I do think you can make incredible progress, but I wouldn't worry too much about the type of muscle fibers. I'd worry more about the proximity to failure to try and activate and break down all of your muscle fibers. That's going to matter at the end of the day. Next question is from Hassan C. Thanks for answering the question. Would you recommend supersetting dumbbell curls and hammer curls? Example, 15 to 20 reps curls followed by 15 to 20 hammer curls within the 90-second break. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So for this one, I'd say if it's like at the end of your workout and it's some type of advanced method where you're taking it past failure, go for it. If that's the meat and potatoes of your bicep volume, I would not recommend that, because subconsciously you're going to reserve energy on the first 15 to 20 reps, and you're going to eventually just turn it into a 40 rep set of pump work, and you're not going to get a whole ton out of that. So I would definitely advise against that, unless it's like a legitimate drop set at the very end of your workout, maybe once, maybe twice a week. Next question is also a program review. I apologize, man, I'm not going to get to that. Let's see. Next question, Robert G. Any experience or knowledge of Steve Shaw's rest pause block training? Very similar to myo reps. Is it nearly as good as rep goal or straight sets? I'm actually not familiar with his rest pause block training in particular, so I don't want to speak too much on that, but I will speak on just overall rest pause style training in general, or anything similar to it like myo reps. So that's a very efficient way to train. I definitely do vouch for it. I've actually trained like that quite a bit in the past. It's extremely efficient. It's mentally engaging, and physically, I don't think so. If you have everything properly programmed for you, I think the results would be pretty similar compared to straight sets. Rep goal, I would count as straight sets as well. I think the biggest thing here is just realizing that it's not going to be better in terms of results. It just might be a little bit more efficient in terms of your workouts. That's all I'm going to say on that one. I do love rest pause training. If anything, it's equal, maybe not quite as optimal, but it's definitely a great way to train. Very mentally engaging, and it makes training fun. Like, I love to go through phases where I just do rest pause. I've done that probably once or twice in the past. Next question from Lightbringer357. How would you structure an antagonist type split? It seems like no matter what way it's structured, you will have some overlapping fatigue going into the next training day. For example, doing chest and biceps, then going into back and triceps with potentially sore biceps for pulling movements. Yeah, this is just going to be, you just need to wait for some adaptations to happen. It's never going to feel perfect right off the bat. It might take a couple weeks, might take a month or so, but that won't be an issue after a few weeks or a couple months. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that at all. Train through it. Might kind of suck to train with sore biceps when you're training your back for a little bit, but yeah, you'll be fine, especially for a smaller muscle group like your arms. Just wait till your body adapts to it. You'll be fine. Next question from Chris Catalina. Would be interested in your favorite diet strategies for natty hypertrophy bros? Cut bulk cycles, what diets, if any, you dig? How aggressive to cut? How big should a tiny dude be eating? How aggressively should a fatter older dude conduct a cut? So let's see. With this question, there's a couple parts to it. I do like, okay, so my personal favorite diet strategies is I like to permabulk, and not dirty bulk, but I like to do a long-term consistent lean bulk. I think, and this is more so just mental, I don't think you should plan your cuts unnecessarily. So what I'm basically trying to say is, if you don't have any reason to cut down, I don't know if you should be planning it. Like, I understand wanting to get lean for summer and whatnot, but I think if you don't really care about that, just keep lean bulking. until you ever decide that you do want to cut. And that's my own personal mindset on that. And that, I think that's what's allowed me to keep building more muscle than a lot of other people that have maybe trained for the same amount of time but have done constant cutting cycles where they're just kind of on the fence of if they should bulk or cut. Like, just kind of perma bulk. I know it's kind of a meme, but like, yeah, I mean, it's very legit. Keep bulking, keep doing it lean, eat healthy, build muscle, cut whenever you need to, and you'll have built up muscle for the longest time. Like, the last time I did a cut was 2019. I got down to like 9 or 10% body fat. I was shredded, but like, if I kept cutting every single year, there's no way I'd be as big as I am right now. Not even close. It's because I kept doing a lean bulk, 100%. So that's my own personal strategy. As for how big should a tiny dude be eating and how aggressively should a fat or older dude conduct a cut, those questions are very vague. But what I would say is there are a bunch of really good calorie calculators online. My biggest piece of advice is just track what you normally eat and track your weight every day. Do that for like a week or two. Understand what your maintenance calories are. Go from there. Adjust from there. The more you get used to tracking your calories, the more you can kind of just eyeball it. Yeah, you have to find what your maintenance calories is at and adjust from there. Next question from Patrick Julius. Are chest presses sufficient to build a front delt, or is it necessary to mix in OHP and or front delt raises? So yes, chest presses are sufficient to build the front delt, but they won't build it optimally. If you're trying to optimize your growth of your front delt, you do have to add an OHP, and I would recommend adding in front raises as well. I do think with front delts being a very overdeveloped muscle group on a lot of people, it wouldn't be necessary to do. Just from like a general sense, you should apply that volume elsewhere mentality. But if you are trying to grow your front delts, yeah, isolate them, do your compound lifts that prioritize your front delts, isolations as well, and you should be good. But in the meantime, yeah, your front delts will probably still grow through chest work. It just won't be optimal. Next question from Jojo Bizarre. Question for next one. In regards to exercise order for isolations, John Meadows used to say activate, load, and stretch the muscle. Do you think this matters a ton? Example, doing a barbell curl, spider curl, then incline curl, or tricep focus dip, push down, then an overhead extension. Thanks. Ooh, that is a really interesting one. I never followed John Meadows too much. I agree with everything on this. Activate, load, and stretch. Yeah, that is genius. That's actually something that I've kind of talked about on this channel before, where I talk about using a shortened position to build up your mind-muscle connection a little bit with that muscle, and then also use a lengthened position just for overall hypertrophy, and then something that you can just overall progress on where you're in a mechanically advantaged position, like that barbell curl you mentioned. Genius way to train. Absolutely great. You have the exercise selection down. That's how you should be choosing a lot of your exercise selection. Program your other variables from there, and you are golden. Great one, Jojo Bizarre. That is great. Next question from Orlicht. Number one, what's your opinion on not tracking certain lifts or even all of them and just focusing on technique or getting near failure? I would say if you're stuck in the mindset of sacrificing training fundamentals in order to artificially progressively overload, don't track your lifts. Learn how to train hard. Get the reward of training hard, not the reward of hitting the PR, and that will teach you how to train properly. So do I think this is a good long-term approach? No, but I think if you're stuck in that power building type mindset, use what you said, use that to break out of that mindset and then get back into tracking your training. I do recommend that, and I actually had to do that to myself. I tricked myself out of caring so much about those PRs, and I turned into a bodybuilder, so it worked out pretty well. Number two, weird question, but if you could control the load instead of fixed weight, have a changing weight, and for example, keep the weight at 90% of your max at every rep in all parts of the movement, would that be superior to fixed weight? Okay, so you're saying like there's two ways you could interpret this. The first one would be 90% of your max. So I'm assuming you mean relative to your current fatigue. So like more relative intensity. So I don't know how much that would matter. Well, that's a really interesting question, because technically you'd be very close to failure on every rep, but I don't know if you would ever actually hit failure, because it's always going to be 90% for that single rep. That's an interesting one. The other way you could interpret this question is if the weight would be consistent throughout the reps. So when you say that, I'm assuming you mean a consistent strength curve. The tension curve is consistent with the strength curve of that pattern. I would say that is optimal. Although we don't have that for every lift. You've got me thinking on this one, man. So I don't know if you can see it in the camera right now, but there's a rowing machine I have right there. It's plate loaded, that gray one in the back, that matches the strength curve of your back. So when you're doing your rows, the plates go up on an angle like this. So as you pull, when your back naturally starts to get a little bit weaker as you pull back, basically what happens is it matches the strength curve of your back. So the plates come up, matches the strength curve of your back, and it works really well, and I love it. I can't say that that would work for every lift because I haven't tried it, but I mean, in theory, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So I would say potentially for that part. For the 90% part, very interesting. I can't answer that one. I wish I could. That would be, I'm sure we'll have some type of technology where it's some type of advanced cable system in the future that does that. That's pretty interesting. So program review, unfortunately can't do that one, man. I apologize. Another one beneath that. Monkey bars every day, 855. Yeah, haha. I used to bucket full of rocks and books when I started lifting. I'm assuming that's in response to my kind of ghetto quarantine workout contraption. For number 4, do you take creatine? If so, how much, how frequently? Nah, I don't take creatine. I used to, but it's like, I just don't. I don't even have a reason that I don't. I just don't. Oscar's wider. Do you think a 3-plate bench is reasonable standard by which to expect finally getting a girlfriend, or is 365 more reasonable? I don't think 315 is reasonable. I do think a lot of girls, especially the high quality brunettes, do like things a little bit heavier than that. 315 could be okay. Like you might start getting some options, but for myself, it took till about 330. So I don't want to guarantee you anything at 315. I'd push it a little bit farther. 365 is unnecessary at that point. You're just kind of overkill. Like it's finding the happy medium. I find that most girls will come to you around that 330. Or alternatively, have you ever worked with reverse grip bench? Thoughts on it as an upper chest exercise? I have a little bit, but I was a beginner at the time, so I have no idea if my results actually came from that. I've never had a particularly good upper chest, which is what that is intended to focus on. So at the same time, I've also never trained it enough. I don't think it's anything special, but I'm not entirely sure on that one. I do know it's generally pretty safe for your shoulders, though, so it's a good alternative if you're dealing with injury. Next question from Olvi. What are your thoughts and philosophy on deloads? Kind of already answered that one, so not going to go through it again. Next question from Catfinder3000. That's a solid name, my man. Can we please have the intermediate training template that you mentioned in your beginner template video from about 2 months ago? Maybe. Next question from Raffaello. Total sets to failure per workout as well as per week. That is a very vague question. I'd say total sets to failure. There's multiple ways to interpret what failure is. Some people think failure is doing as many reps as you can achieve. Some people think failure is actually failing a rep. Very rarely do I actually fail a rep unless it's on an isolation lift. So I would have to go in my program and really think about that one to answer that. I would say hard sets per week per muscle, generally between 8 to 20. Generally between 8 to 20. There are some muscles I've trained with higher volume. There are some muscles I've trained with lower volume. The ones with lower volume, definitely not optimal. That's for maintenance phase. That's probably the best answer I can give you for that one. Next question from Natural Hypertrophy RU. What is your opinion on preventing overuse injuries while having previously tendon inflammations for a long time? Let's see. Incapability of performing the exercise without destroying your structure could be a little bit annoying for most of us. It is completely impossible to progress on a certain movement pattern if the exercise selection the program and priorities won't be changed. Have you had some overuse injuries, and could you share your experience with how you had dealt with it and how you figured out how to perform certain movement patterns pain-free again? In my opinion, it is truly the most difficult problem to deal with for a non-experienced lifter. Someone who hasn't dealt with it for a long time is lucky in a sense, but also he would never be able to develop the strength of mind and love for his body as much as someone who has dealt with it how long but solved it forever. Interesting. Yeah, it's a good perspective. So I've actually never really had to deal with injuries before. I think that's just because I'm naturally and kind of instinctively mentally very conservative. So I don't overdo it with anything. Like I've done a lot of like dangerous things before and tried like dangerous sports or whatever. I've never been injured. I think it's just because mentally I'm very reserved and conservative, but I think physically there's definitely something in my genetics that prevents me from getting injured or having pains and whatnot, which I'm super lucky for that, 100%. But I guess for the second part of your question, I guess maybe I don't have as much strength of mind and love for my body and its ability to not be injured. To answer the rest of your question, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but I do find that proper warm-ups and the proper warm-up protocol on top of and that's short term, that's not a long-term solution, on top of a balanced training approach is going to be the best way to prevent injuries. You can't do way more presses than you can rows and vice versa. That stuff tends to lead to injuries combined with bad technique and whatnot on lifts or improperly programmed programs. So keep everything balanced. Find the warm-ups that work for you in the meantime that will still allow you to train a certain movement, and you should be good. Anything more specific or anything more severe, definitely go see a physical therapist or a doctor. I don't want to try and give advice on injuries in general because there's a big scale when it comes to the severity of the injury. Next question from JD Lifting. What do you think about Larson press or any other bench press variation that removes leg drive? Should people use them instead of a standard bench if your goal is purely bodybuilding, or do you think using leg drive is more beneficial because you can use more weight? I don't think using leg drive is more beneficial. I think there will be slight benefits to eliminating leg drive. I don't think you have to Larson press forever, but I think if you can eventually get into a point where your legs are there for your balance but no leg drive itself, that will help you a lot. I think that would be pretty similar to a Larson press. But then again, I haven't experimented a whole ton with Larson press and whatnot. Next question from Ian Graham White. That's a statement, actually, not a question. Next question from Edvin Sternerup. Any idea on why no one seems to be training their hip flexors? People seem to think that the two main movements for lower body is a squat and a hinge, but I think it makes more sense that it's a squat and a reverse squat because when you actually think about it, a hinge is just a more isolated version of a squat. It would be like saying the two main movements for the upper body is a push and a front raise instead of a push and a pull. That's an interesting one. I would say a squat and a hip flexor movement would be just like a push and a front raise. So I'm not looking at it from movement patterns here. I'm going to focus. This is a hypertrophy channel, so I'm assuming if you're focusing on hypertrophy, squat and knee flexion movements are going to train your quads enough. Hinges will prioritize your hamstrings and glutes. Glutes are worked in both squats and hinges, so glutes should be fine. But from a pure musculature perspective, you're pretty much covering everything. If you're doing direct ab work or direct hip flexor work, those kind of go hand in hand. You definitely should be doing it, but I think at the end of the day, for overall muscle mass, squats and hinges are 100% the way to go. Interesting concept, though. That's definitely not something people talk about very much. Next question from Unsuitable. What are exercises for the way to stretch on shoulder movements? OHP, my man, do some dumbbell and barbell overhead presses, certain machines you can do on that. You can even do really any type of bench-assisted raises as well, front, side, or rear. As long as you just kind of understand very basic anatomy, like when your shoulder's in front of you like this and you're working your rear delts, that's a weighted stretch right there as long as you're in the right position. You can lie down in different ways or lean on different benches in different ways to try and isolate each area of your shoulder with a weighted stretch. Just play around with it, man. Have some fun with it. Like, If you're leaning back on an incline doing front raises like this, that's going to be a weighted stretch on your front delt right back here. Same thing for a side raise. If you're leaning, let's say I was to face the side and put this at 45 degrees, my elbow's on my side like this with my shoulder, and I raise up like that, all of a sudden, that's a weighted stretch at the bottom like that. So you would have to technically, like, you would have to go a little bit lower. Like, you'd have to actually go all the way down, but I think you get what I'm saying there. So next question is, are you the God? Are you there, God? It's me, Dave. That's a good name. My right pec is significantly smaller than my left pec. How do I address this problem? Yeah, I would just say use dumbbells for your presses, use dumbbells for your flies, get some variation in there. I would avoid any machine where the right and left side are locked in together. Keep them free motion. That will over time fix the imbalance. Generally, imbalances don't actually end up going away, and that's totally fine. Next question is, this is just a guy that trolls me all the time. After party, you have fully developed bubble get. Think you meant gut, but thanks. Next question from Victor Lopez. Philosophy of ab training. Just like any other muscle, they're resilient. You can train at pretty high frequency. Get a weighted stretch, train it from both angles, get a good contraction, you should be good. That's actually the last one. So that's Q&A number 3. Thanks everybody for joining. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll cover them in Q&A number 5.